Revenge with Karen. The air up here doesn't smell like oxygen. It smells like burned kerosene and entitlement. If you've never stood on the roof of a 40-story skyscraper, while a Bell 429 Global Ranger tries to touch down in a crosswind, let me paint you a picture. It's like being inside a washing machine filled with razor blades and noise. The rotor wash was whipping my hair across my face like a scourging whip, stinging my eyes. But I didn't flinch. I just stood there, holding the decibel meter, watching the sleek, black insect of machine wobble its way down onto my painted concrete. Most people think the sky is free. It's not. It's leased, zoned, and regulated, just like the dirt under your feet. And right now, the man in the back of that chopper was treating my airspace like a dive bar toilet. Speaking of trash taking itself out, if you're into stories where rich jerks get absolutely dismantled by the people they ignore, go ahead and hit subscribe button and maybe drop a like. It keeps the revenge engine running and my caffeine addiction funded. The skids hit the deck with a jarring thud that vibrated through the soles of my sensible heels. This wasn't a smooth operator. This was a cowboy landing. The turbine whine began to spool down, dropping from a scream to a high-pitched whistle that drilled right into your molars. The side door slid open before the rotors had even stopped spinning, a massive safety violation, by the way, and out stepped God's gift to venture capital. Let's call him Sterling, because of course his name would be Sterling. Sterling was the CEO of Ascenzi's Tech, a company that ostensibly made synergistic cloud-based optimization tools, which is corporate speak for we fire people using an algorithm. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, and he looked like he'd been manufactured in a lab that specialized in teeth whitening and arrogance. He didn't step down, he descended. I checked the decibel meter, 115 dB. The limit for this zone, specifically written into the lease covenants of the building he occupied, was 95 dB during business hours. It was 20 decibels over. That's the difference between a lawnmower and a chainsaw. "Hey, you," Sterling shouted over the dying whine of the engine. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking through me. He snapped his fingers, actually snapped them. "Grab the bags. We're late for the Q3 projection meeting." I stared at him. I was wearing a gray blazer, dark slacks, and a headset around my neck. To him, I was ground crew. I was the help. I was an NPC in the video game of his life. "I'm not baggage handling," I said, my voice flat. The wind snatched the words, but he heard them. He stopped, mid-stride, and turned to look at me properly for the first time. His face contorted into a sneer that probably practiced in the mirror every morning. "Excuse me, do you know who signs the lease on the top 3 floors of this dump?" "I know exactly who leases the top 3 floors," I said. "I know that Ascenzi's Tech is currently in violation of 3 separate FAA noise abatement procedures and the building's vibration ordinance." He laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. "Oh, cute. The clipboard girl has a rulebook. Listen, sweetheart, I don't have time for bureaucratic foreplay. My pilot needs a refuel. Make it happen. And get someone to carry these bags, or I'm calling your supervisor and having you scrubbing toilets in the basement by noon." Threw a leather satchel at my feet. It landed with a heavy, expensive thud. I looked at the bag, then I looked at him. The rage that lives in my chest, the cold, hard knot that's been there for 5 years, tightened just a fraction. This wasn't just about rudeness. It was about the reckless speed, the corner cutting, the belief that physics and laws apply to little people. It was the same attitude that killed Mark. "You're unregistered for a refuel," I said, stepping over his bag. "This is a drop-and-go pad. No loitering." "I own this building," he screamed, his face turning a lovely shade of hypertensive red. "Metaphorically speaking, my rent pays for the concrete you're standing on. Now move." He brushed past me, his shoulder checking mine hard enough to make me stumble. He didn't look back. He marched toward the roof access door, punched the code, which he shouldn't have had, meaning someone in security was getting fired, and vanished into the stairwell. I stood alone on the windy roof. The pilot, a young guy who looked terrified, was still in the cockpit, going through his shutdown checklist with shaking hands. He knew that approach was garbage. He knew they were flying too heavy and too fast. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call a supervisor. I didn't call maintenance. I opened a file named Ascenzi's Lease Audit V4, PDF, and scrolled to Article 14, Section C, Aviation Privileges and Revocation. "Third unregistered landing this week," I muttered to myself. I took a photo of the helicopter's tail number N449 at. Then I took a photo of the leather bag sitting on the deck. A junior staffer from the maintenance crew, a kid named Leo, popped his head out of the access hatch a moment later. He looked at the bag, then at me. "Jesus, Alexis," Leo said, shivering in the wind. "The guy flies in like he owns the sky. You want me to bring his bag down?" "No," I said, staring at the sleek black helicopter. "Leave it. If he wants it, he can come get it." "And Leo, yeah, start a log, every landing, every decibel reading. Every time he misses a radio check. I want it all timestamped." "You going to report him to the building manager?" Leo asked, confused. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile, something like that. I didn't tell Leo that the building manager reports to the asset management VP, who reports to the director of operations, who reports to me. I didn't tell him that the dump Sterling complained about was the crown jewel of a portfolio I'd spent a decade building out of blood money and grief. Sterling thought he was yelling at a tech. He had no idea he just declared war on his landlord. The wind howled, smelling of ozone and impending doom. I took a deep breath. It smelled like victory. To understand why I didn't just evict Sterling the moment he threw his bag at me, you have to understand the ghost that lives in the contract. 5 years ago, I wasn't the owner of the Skyline. I was Alexis, the fiancée of Mark Roeder Davidson. Mark was a medevac pilot. He was the kind of guy who had hydraulic fluid under his fingernails and a smile that could light up a rainy tarmac. He didn't fly for CEOs, flew for trauma centers. He moved organs, accident victims, life itself. We were 2 weeks away from our wedding. I had the dress fitting scheduled. We had put a deposit down on a little house in the suburbs, nothing like the glass and steel monsters I own now. Then came the disruptors. A tech startup, let's call them Volair, was pushing a new, revolutionary navigation assist system. They fast-tracked the certification. They lobbied the board, paid off the right consultants to say that the glitches were edge cases. Mark's chopper was the test bed for the beta rollout. He told me it was glitchy. He told me the altimeter lagged. He filed reports. The company, Volair, told his supervisors he was resistant to innovation. They threatened his contract, so he flew. He was coming in for a landing at General Hospital on a foggy Tuesday. System calibrated the rooftop deck at 50 feet higher than it actually was. The computer overrode his manual input. Safety lockout, they called it. He flew into the side of the building at 140 knots. The settlement was massive. Go away money, they call it. They wanted me to sign an NDA and disappear. They wanted me to buy a beach house and cry quietly into a margarita. Instead, I took every cent of that blood money, Mark's life, converted into wire transfers, and I weaponized it. I didn't want a beach house. I wanted the ground they stood on. I learned everything about commercial zoning. I learned that in this city, the person who owns the dirt doesn't always own the sky. The air rights and the aviation lease are separate entities. It's a loophole the size of a frantic heartbeat. I found the building where Volair had their HQ. The building Sterling now occupies. Back then, was owned by a crumbling pension fund. I bought the building, but I did it through 3 shell companies. Why? Because I wanted to see them bleed slowly. But here is the kicker, the ghost contract. When I bought the building, I separated the rooftop aviation lease from the commercial tenancy. I created a separate entity, Apex Airspace LLC, which holds the master lease for the helipad. So, technically, building owner, Shell Company A, leases the roof to Apex Airspace Me, and Apex Airspace sublets landing rights to the tenants. When Sterling's company, Ascenzies, moved in 6 months ago, they signed a standard commercial lease. Buried in the appendix, on page 402, was a clause. Tenant agrees that all aviation activities are subject to the exclusive oversight and regulatory discretion of the master airspace lessor, Apex Airspace LLC. Sterling didn't read it. His lawyers skimmed it. They saw aviation access included and high-fived each other. They didn't know that Apex Airspace LLC isn't a service provider. It's a memorial. Back in the present, I sat in my office, a small, windowless room on the 12th floor marked building ops that I used when I was undercover. My actual office is a penthouse across town, but I like being close to the pulse here. I pulled up the original deed, ran my finger over the signature line. Mark's initials were scribbled in the margin of my notebook, a habit I couldn't break. Sterling was the same species as the men who killed Mark, the move fast and break things species. The laws are for poor people species. He wasn't just a bad tenant, he was a symptom of the disease that took the love of my life. I looked at the photo of his helicopter on my screen. The timestamps showed he was cutting his approach turns too tight, banking over a populated plaza to save 40 seconds of flight time. "You think you're flying, Sterling?" I whispered to the screen, my voice trembling with a mix of grief and ice-cold rage. "But you're just falling with style. And I control the gravity." I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer, a shark named Harrison who cost me $600 an hour and was worth every penny. "Harrison," I said, "pull the archival wind shear reports for the last 5 years. Get me the FAA liaison for District 9 on the line. I have a concern about structural resonance." "You going hunting, Alexis?" Harrison asked. He knew the history. He knew about Mark. "No," I said, staring at the face of the man who treated me like luggage. "I'm not hunting. I'm setting a trap." The ghost of Mark was in the room with me. I could smell his leather jacket. I could hear his laugh. And for the first time in 5 years, it felt like I could do something for him. I couldn't bring him back, but I could ground the bastards who thought the sky belonged to them. 3 days later, the trap began to vibrate. It was Tuesday. Taco Tuesday in the cafeteria, Disruptor Tuesday in the Ascenzi's boardroom, and Please Don't Crash Into My Building Tuesday for me. I was on the roof again, this time with a legitimate contractor, a guy named Miller, who was checking the flashing around the vents. We're discussing water sealant, riveting stuff, when the air pressure dropped. That thwup-thwup-thwup sound battered against my chest. It wasn't the Bell 429 this time. It was something bigger, louder. A Sikorsky S-76. The kind of corporate chariot usually reserved for heads of state or rappers. Sterling had upgraded. He came in hot. Way too hot. The approach vector for this pad requires a north-to-south glide slope to avoid the HVAC units on the adjacent tower. Sterling's pilot, clearly under pressure to shave seconds, came in from the east, banking hard over the edge of the parapet. "Whoa," Miller ducked, clutching his hard hat. The downdraft kicked up a cloud of gravel and soot. A loose piece of tar paper ripped off the roof and slapped against the safety cage. The helicopter flared aggressively and slammed onto the pad. Struts compressed so hard I thought they'd snap. I was already walking toward them before the rotor slowed. This was a Category B violation, unsafe approach vector. The door opened. Sterling jumped out. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was wearing casual visionary wear, a black t-shirt, jeans that cost $1,000, and aviator sunglasses. He was holding a venti latte in one hand and his phone in the other. He spotted me. He actually rolled his eyes. "You again," shouted, not bothering to lower his voice. "Does the building not have any other staff, or are you just obsessed with me?" "You came in from the east," I said, shouting over the turbine whine. "That's a restricted vector. You flew directly over the intake vents for the hospital next door. If you dump fuel or have a leak, you're poisoning patients." He took a sip of his latte. "Did we crash?" "No, but then it wasn't unsafe. It was efficient. That's the difference between you and me. See risks? I see lines of code to be rewritten." He gestured vaguely at the helicopter. "Get the pilot to wash the windshield. He hit a bird or a peasant or something on the way up. It's streaky." "I am not," I said, spacing my words out like I was talking to a toddler holding a hand grenade, washing your windshield. He stepped into my personal space. He smelled of expensive musk and stale coffee. "What is your name?" "Alexis." "Okay, Alexis. Here's a lesson in economics. My company just closed a Series C funding round worth $400 million. That means my time is worth roughly $10,000 a minute. I have spent 2 minutes talking to you. That's 20 grand I just wasted. Are you going to reimburse me, or are you going to find a bucket and a sponge?" My hand twitched. I wanted to push him. The roof edge was right there. It would be so easy. Oops, wind shear. But that's what a chaotic person would do. I'm not chaotic. I am a lease controller. "I'm filing an incident report," I said calmly. He laughed. He actually threw his head back and laughed. Then he did something that sealed his fate. He finished his latte, crumpled the cup, and dropped it. He didn't throw it at a trash can. He just opened his hand and let gravity take it. The cup rolled across the concrete and wedged itself against a drain. "File this," he said, pointing at the trash. "Clean it up, ground tech." Walked away. I stared at the cup. It was a mundane piece of litter. But in that moment, it was a declaration of war. I pulled out my phone. I didn't take a picture of the cup. I took a picture of the pilot who was looking at me with apologetic eyes. Then I walked over to the pilot. "Hey," I said, "what's your squawk code?" 1200, he muttered. "VFR, and your altimeter setting?" 29.92. "Standard pressure," I nodded. "The local barometric pressure is 29.85. You were flying 70 feet lower than your instruments told you. The pilot went pale. Mr. Vance? He was rushing me. He kept tapping on the glass. I know, I said softly. It's not your fault, but it is going to be your problem. I walked back to the maintenance hatch. I didn't pick up the cup. I left it there. It was evidence. I went back to my office and logged into the FAA's anonymous reporting portal, but I didn't stop there. I opened the building's legal dossier. I drafted a letter to Ascenzi's Tech. Subject, Notice of Lease Violation Section 14C, but I didn't send it yet. You don't fire a warning shot at a man like Sterling. You wait until you have a clear shot at the engine block. I called my lawyer again. Harrison, initiate the audit on the quiet enjoyment clause for the other tenants. I want statements from every office on the 38th and 39th floors complaining about the noise. You building a class action? Harrison asked. No, I said, watching the security feed as Sterling abused the elevator buttons. I'm building a guillotine. If knowledge is power, then data is ammunition. And I was stocking up for a siege. That afternoon, I called in a favor from a security contractor I'd used on my other properties. By 8:00 p.m., after Sterling and his minions had left for their disruptive dinners of endangered tuna and cocaine, we were on the roof. We installed 4 high-definition, wide-angle cameras with directional microphones. We tucked them into the housing of the HVAC units and the lip of the elevator override. They were invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I wasn't just tracking landings anymore. I was tracking behavior. Back in the ops room, my bunker, I set up the monitor wall. It looked like the Batcave, if Batman was a middle-aged woman with a vendetta and a Costco membership. Over the next week, the footage rolled in. And my God, it was a masterclass in toxicity. Wednesday, 09:00 a.m., Sterling lands. He steps out and immediately starts screaming at someone on his AirPods. The directional mic picked it up crisp and clear. I don't care if his wife is in labor, Todd. If the code isn't deployed by noon, can deliver the baby in the unemployment line. Thursday, 2:00 p.m., another landing. This time, he brought guests, potential investors. He was showing off the view. Yeah, we basically own the building, he lied, gesturing to my skyline. I'm thinking of putting a pudding green up here. Maybe a helipad lounge with a wet bar. I snorted into my coffee. A wet bar. Weight load of a wet bar on that section of the roof would compromise the structural integrity of the elevator shaft. The man was a walking liability lawsuit. But the real gold came on Friday. It was raining. A nasty, sleeting rain that turned the city gray. Standard safety protocols dictate a no-fly for rooftop pads in these conditions due to microbursts around the skyscrapers. I saw the strobe lights first on the monitor. He was coming in. Keyed the radio to the building frequency, which I monitored but rarely used. Ascenzi's one, this is building security, I said, deepening my voice. Weather is below minimums. Divert to city airport. There was a pause. Then Sterling's voice cut through, overriding his pilot. Ignore that, it's just the rent-a-cops. Put it down. Sir, it's really slick up there, the pilot argued. Do I pay you to fly or to give me a weather report? Land the bird, I watched, holding my breath. The helicopter wavered, buffeted by the wind. It crabbed sideways, missing the safety net by inches. It slammed down hard, bouncing once before settling. Sterling jumped out, slipping on the wet concrete. He fell hard on his ass. I didn't laugh. I should have, but I didn't, because I saw what happened next. He got up, furious. He walked over to the pilot's door, ripped it open, and grabbed the pilot by the jacket. He shook him, made me look like an idiot. You did that on purpose. Assault. He just assaulted flight crew on an active helipad. That's a federal offense. That's not a lease violation, that's jail time. I hit save clip. I backed it up to 3 different servers. I burned it onto a flash drive. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating my face. This was it. This was the smoking gun. But I wasn't going to fire it yet. Why? Because I needed him to dig deeper. I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to commit the ultimate sin of the corporate psychopath. I needed him to believe he was untouchable. I printed out a still frame of him slipping on the wet concrete. I taped it to my wall next to the decibel logs. Slippery slope, Sterling, I whispered. Then I saw something else on the feed. One of his assistants, a young woman, maybe 22, was running behind him, trying to hold an umbrella over his head. Slapped the umbrella away, breaking it. She looked like she was about to cry. She looked like me, 5 years ago, standing in a lawyer's office being told my fiancé's death was a statistical anomaly. That was the moment it stopped being business. I opened a new email draft. Addressed to Federal Aviation Administration, Office of Whistleblower Protection. Subject: Systemic Violations at Site 409B. I attached the video of the assault, but I didn't hit send. Not yet. I wanted to see his face when the world fell apart. I wanted to be there. I needed one more thing. I needed him to interfere with the building itself. I needed him to touch the steel. The building is a living thing. It breathes through the HVAC systems, it drinks through the plumbing, and it has a nervous system made of fiber optics and copper wire. I am its Dr. Sterling was a virus. Monday morning, issued a standard maintenance order. Code 44 ed. This is a mandatory fuel system purge for the rooftop auxiliary tanks. It requires the helipad to be closed for 6 hours. It's not optional. If you don't purge the water condensation from the tanks, you get fuel icing. Fuel icing stops engines. Stopped engines make helicopters fall out of the sky. I posted the notice physically on the helipad access door and sent a digital notification to the Ascenzi's operations manager. Notice: helipad closed for maintenance. Monday 08/00/14/00. Danger: fueling operations. I was in the basement monitoring station when the alert popped up. System override, access door 4. Someone had bypassed the electronic lock I'd engaged. I switched the camera feed to the roof. It was Sterling's assistant, the Chad of the group, a guy named Braden who wore loafers with no socks. He was ripping the physical danger sign off the door. He balled it up and threw it off the roof. Then he keyed in an override code, a code that only emergency services should have. I grabbed my radio. Ops to roof. You are breaching a safety lockout. The fuel lines are pressurized. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt a landing. Braden looked at the camera and spoke into his wrist, presumably to Sterling. Then he looked back at the camera and flipped the bird. Override authorized by Mr. Vance. Braden shouted at the lens. We have a VIP arrival. Delay your maintenance. Delay the maintenance. My blood ran cold. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a flashback. We can't delay the launch, Mark. Just override the sensor. It's a glitch. They were doing it again. They were gambling with physics. I watched as the fuel contractor, a burly guy named Mike who I'd known for years, threw his hands up and backed away. He wasn't going to fight a suit. He packed up his gear and left the roof, leaving the purge incomplete. 10 minutes later, the S-76 landed. I didn't storm up there. I didn't scream. I went deadly quiet. I opened the building's liability insurance portal. I initiated a coverage freeze. Effectively, I notified the insurer that the tenant had willfully bypassed a life safety lockout. This meant that if that helicopter crashed, Ascenzi's wasn't covered, not for a dime. Then I printed the log showing the override. User, admin override, time, 08:42 a.m. I walked up to the 40th floor. I didn't go to the roof. I went to the reception desk of Ascenzi's tech. The office was nauseatingly hip. Exposed brick, bean-bag chairs, neon sign that said hustle harder. The receptionist looked at me like I was a delivery driver who'd gotten lost. Can I help you? I need to leave this for Mr. Vance, I said, sliding a sealed red envelope across the desk. He's in a meeting. He'll want to see this. Inside the envelope wasn't a threat. It was a copy of the receipt for the override and a single index card where I had typed, condensation in fuel lines freezes at 30,000 feet, or at 500 feet if the mix is bad. You didn't just override a lock, you rolled the dice. I walked out. I knew he wouldn't care. He'd probably use the paper to spit his gum out. But that wasn't the point. The point was the paper trail. In a court of law, willful negligence is the difference between a fine and manslaughter. I went back to my office and pulled up the schematics for the building's electrical grid. Specifically, circuit breakers that controlled the rooftop navigation beacons. You want to override my systems? I muttered, tracing the line with my finger. Fine, let's see how you like it when the system fights back. I wasn't going to sabotage him. I wasn't going to cause a crash. That would make me him. But I was going to make sure that the next time he tried to land, the building simply refused to cooperate. I flagged the rooftop beacon circuit for emergency inspection. App was set. The bait was taken. Now I just had to wait for the beast to step on the plate. The rumors started on the 14th floor. There was a small tenant there, Drone Start, a collective of engineering students building medical delivery drones. They were loud, messy, and brilliant. They reminded me of Mark. They paid their rent late sometimes, but they always brought me donuts. On Wednesday, I was doing a walkthrough of the lobby when I saw a commotion by the elevators. It was Braden, Sterling's lackey, and 2 security guards contracted by Ascenzi's, not the building. They were cornering one of the drone start kids, a girl named Sarah. "You can't bring that battery pack in here," Braden was sneering. "It's a fire hazard. Mr. Vance complained about the smell of solder in the vents. We're evicting you." Sarah looked terrified. "We have a lease. And the ventilation is separate. We're the anchor tenant," Braden said, adjusting his cuffs. "Absorbed your floor plan this morning. Ops wants the space for meditation room. Pack your shit." He reached out to grab the equipment box she was holding. "Put it down," I said. My voice echoed in the marble lobby. I wasn't shouting. I used the voice I use when I'm negotiating with the FAA, the voice that says I am not asking. Braden spun around. He saw me, the ground tech from the roof. "Oh, look, it's the baggage handler," he laughed. "Go fix a toilet. It's executive business." I said, "Put the box down, Braden." He stepped closer, trying to intimidate me. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I can have you fired before you blink. Ascenzi's runs this building." "Ascenzi's," I said, stepping into his space, "leases floors 38 through 40. Drone Start leases floor 14. Their lease is valid until 2028. We bought their lease out. Hostile takeover of the floor rights." "No," I said. "Didn't, because the building owner has to approve any lease transfer." And she didn't. Braden blinked. The owner is a shell company, Apex Holdings." "Apex Holdings," I said, "is a subsidiary of Davidson Real Estate Trust." I pulled my ID badge out of my pocket. I usually keep it reversed, showing only the access card side. I flipped it over. "Alexis Davidson, owner/principal." Braden stared at the card. Then he looked at my face. Then back at the card. Color drained from his face faster than the battery on a 3-year-old iPhone. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was like watching a fish suffocate. "Miss Davidson?" he squeaked. "That's right," I said. "And unless you want to explain to Mr. Vance why his meditation room just cost him his entire security deposit and triggered a harassment clause, you will apologize to Sarah, and you will get your non-union security guards out of my lobby." Braden looked like he was going to vomit. I didn't know," Mr. Vance said. "Mr. Vance thinks he's a god." I cut him off. "But he's just a tenant, and tenants can be evicted." I turned to Sarah. "Go upstairs, Sarah. Solder as much as you want. I'll upgrade the ventilation for you on the house." She scampered off, clutching her box. Braden was still standing there, shaking. Are you going to tell him?" I smiled. "That I own the building? No. I want it to be a surprise." "Please," he whispered. "He'll kill me." "Then I suggest you start updating your LinkedIn, Braden." I walked away, my heels clicking on the marble. The lobby was silent. Every receptionist, every guard, every delivery guy had heard. The word would spread. The whispers would start. The maintenance lady isn't maintenance. She's the landlord. By the end of the day, the Ascenzi's staff were looking at me differently. When I got on the elevator, they stared at their shoes, held doors for me. They looked terrified, all except Sterling. He was still up there in the clouds, unaware that the storm was rising from the ground up. He was insulated by his ego. That evening, I sat in my penthouse, the real one, drinking a glass of very expensive scotch. I watched the lights of the city. I saw the blinking red light on top of my building. The pieces were in place. 1, the noise violations. 2, the assault video. 3, the safety override record. 4, the lease breach. It was time to pull the trigger. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd been saving. "Director Miller, it's Alexis Davidson. We need to talk about the airworthiness of the operations at 409B. Yes, tonight. Revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's a dish best served in triplicate, notarized, and filed with a federal agency." Thursday was the day of the axe. Met Director Miller from the local Flight Standards District Office, FSDO, a coffee shop across the street from my building. Miller was an old-school guy, ex-Navy. He hated cowboys more than I did. I slid the flash drive across the table. "Video of the assault on the flight crew," I said. "Logs of the fuel override, decibel readings, and the lease agreement showing he has no authority to modify building safety systems." Miller plugged the drive into his laptop. Watched the video of Sterling shaking the pilot. His jaw tightened. He watched the clip of Braden tearing down the danger sign. His eyes narrowed. "This guy has a death wish," Miller grunted. "He has a god complex," I corrected. "He thinks the rules are for people who fly coach." Miller closed the laptop. "I can pull his operator's certificate immediately. Emergency suspension. But he'll lawyer up. He'll claim it's a misunderstanding." "Let him lawyer up," I said, revoking the ground lease. Section 14C. Conduct endangering the structural or reputational integrity of the property. Once the lease is pulled, he has no legal place to land. If he lands anyway, it's criminal trespassing and a violation of restricted airspace. Miller nodded. When do you want to drop the hammer? Friday, I said. He has a board meeting. He's flying in the chairman of the board. He wants to impress him. Friday it is, Miller said. I'll have inspectors on standby. I walked back to the building. The air felt electric. When I got to the lobby, I saw Sterling. He was screaming at a delivery driver who was 5 minutes late with his catering. Do you know how much my time is worth? Sterling was yelling, his face purple. I stopped. I couldn't help myself. I walked over. Mr. Vance, I said. He spun around. What? What do you want, grease monkey? I'm busy. You might want to check your email, I said. There's a notification from the building management. I don't read spam, he spat. Get out of my face. It's about the roof, I said. We're doing structural testing tomorrow. The pad might be closed. I was giving him an out. A tiny, microscopic chance to avoid the humiliation. If he checked, if he asked why, if he treated me like a human being for 1 second, I might have just suspended him for a month. He sneered. I don't care about your testing. My chairman is landing at 9:00 a.m. If that roof isn't clear, I'll have your job. I'll buy this building and evict you personally. I'll buy this building. The irony was so sharp it almost cut my tongue. Okay, I said softly. I'll make sure the roof is ready for you. Good girl, he said. He actually patted me on the shoulder, a patronizing, dismissive tap. Maybe there's a Christmas bonus in it for you if you don't screw it up. He walked away. I stood there, feeling the spot where he touched my shoulder. It felt like burning, good girl. I went to the control room. I radioed Leo. Leo, prep the lockout protocols. For the test, Leo asked. No, I said, for the eviction. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up watching old videos of Mark. Him waving from the cockpit, him laughing. They think they own the sky, Lex, he used to say. But the sky doesn't belong to anyone. It just borrows us. Time to return the favor, Mark, I whispered. Friday morning dawned bright and clear. Perfect flying weather. Sterling thought it was going to be his coronation. He didn't know it was his funeral. At 8:00 a.m., the fax machine in the Ascenzi's office. Yes, legal notices still come by fax. Spit out a document. Federal Aviation Administration Emergency Order of Suspension. Simultaneously, an email hit Sterling's inbox from Apex Airspace LLC. Notice of default and termination of aviation privileges. I was in the lobby, drinking coffee, waiting. At 8:15 a.m., Sterling stormed out of the elevator. He wasn't just mad, he was frantic. He had a printed paper in his hand. He marched right up to the front desk security. Who sent this? He screamed, waving the paper. Who is Apex Airspace? Get them on the phone. The security guard, a guy named Sam who I tipped well at Christmas, looked at him calmly. Sir, please lower your voice. Don't tell me what to do. My chairman lands in 45 minutes. This says my landing rights are revoked. This is a joke. It's a glitch. He saw me standing by the ficus plant. He pointed a shaking finger. You did this. You filed that report about the fuel override. I took a sip of coffee. I filed a safety report. Yes, it's mandatory. I'm going to sue you into the Stone Age, he shrieked. I'm going to sue this building, management company, and the FAA. Get me the building owner. Now, the owner isn't available, I said calmly. Then I'm landing anyway. He grabbed his phone and dialed his pilot. Dave, ignore the NOTAM. Yeah, I know what it says. It's a mistake. We have board immunity. Bring the bird in. The chairman is waiting at the airfield. Pick him up and land. If you don't land, you're fired. He hung up and looked at me with wild eyes. You think a piece of paper stops me. I'm Sterling Vance. I build the future. You just sweep the floor. He turned and ran back to the elevators, hitting the button for the roof. He's going up, Sam said to me, reaching for his radio. Should I stop him? No, I said, setting my coffee cup down. Let him go. I adjusted my headset. Leo, is the beacon kill switch active? Active and ready, boss, Leo's voice crackled in my ear. And the FAA inspector. He's on the adjacent roof with a long lens camera. He's ready. Okay, I said, showtime. I walked to the express elevator. I keyed in my override code. It shot me up to the 42nd floor, the roof access, in seconds. I stepped out into the wind. Sterling was already there, pacing like a caged tiger. He was scanning the horizon. In the distance, I could see the dot of the helicopter. The chairman was coming. Sterling saw me. Get off my roof, he yelled. I'm warning you. If you try to block this landing, I'll throw you off. It was unhinged. The pressure of the board meeting, the funding, the lies, it was all crumbling. It's not your roof, Sterling, I said. My voice was calm, but it carried over the wind. The helicopter drew closer. I could hear the thwup-thwup of the blades. It was low, too low. Sterling pulled out a flare gun, part of the emergency kit kept in the lockbox. He held it up. Not to shoot, but to signal. Land here, he waved. He was desperate. I looked at the helicopter, saw the pilot's face. He was terrified. He knew he was violating a federal order, but he was more afraid of Sterling. I looked at Sterling. He was grinning. He thought he'd won. He thought sheer force of will could bend the law. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. It looked like a car key fob. Last chance, Sterling, I said. Call it off. Refuel my chopper, Tech. He screamed, laughing, and bring the champagne. I looked him dead in the eye. I'm not a tech, I said. I pressed the button. Instantly, the high-intensity landing lights around the perimeter of the helipad turned from green to a pulsing, violent red. The Do Not Land cross, a massive X embedded in the concrete LED array, blazed to life in the center of the pad. Simultaneously, the strobes on the navigation tower began flashing the universal aviation signal for field closed/hazard. But the real kicker was the radio. I pulled a handheld transceiver from my blazer pocket. I didn't use the building frequency. I keyed into the emergency guard channel, 121.5, which every pilot monitors. N449 this is Apex Control, I said, my voice steady and authoritative. Your landing clearance is revoked. The helipad is closed. You are in violation of FAA Emergency Order 44 Zulu. Divert immediately or face license suspension. The helicopter was hovering 50 feet above us. The downwash was immense. Sterling looked at the lights. He looked at the radio in my hand. He looked at me. What did you do? He screamed. Turn it back on. Fix it. I can't fix it, I said, because it's not broken. It's evicted. Up in the air, the pilot made his choice. He wasn't going to lose his wings for tech bro. The helicopter pitched nose down, banked hard to the left, accelerated away from the building. No, Sterling shrieked, running toward the edge. Come back, I command you to come back. He watched the helicopter and his chairman and his funding and his future disappear into the skyline. He spun around to face me, his face twisted into a mask of pure hate. He marched toward me, fists clenched. You are dead, he hissed. I will have your job. I will have your life. I will sue this building until it's a parking lot. Do you think you are? I stood my ground. The wind whipped my blazer around me. I felt Mark's leather jacket on my shoulders, spectral and heavy. I told you, I said, I'm not a tech. I took a step forward. My name is Alexis Davidson. I own this building. I own the building next door. And through Apex Airspace, I own the aviation lease you just violated. Sterling stopped. His mouth opened, then closed. You're the owner. I am the landlord, I said. You are in breach. Section 14C, willful endangerment, assault on flight crew, unauthorized modification of life safety systems. I pointed to the roof access door. 2 uniformed police officers and the FAA inspector, Miller, were stepping out. Mr. Vance, Miller shouted over the wind. I'm with the FAA. We need to have a chat about your pilot's statement regarding the assault. Sterling looked at the cops. He looked at me. The arrogance evaporated, placed by the terrified realization of a man who just realized he'd been bullying the executioner. Alexis, he stammered, putting on a sick, charming smile. Look, we got off on the wrong foot. I'm under a lot of stress. Surely we can work this out. I can pay a fine. You can't pay for everything, Sterling, I said. Some things don't have a price tag, like safety, like respect, like a life. It was just a noise violation. He pleaded as the cops moved in. I said, turning my back on him. It was a character violation. I walked to the edge of the roof as they handcuffed him. I looked out at the city. The helicopter was a speck in the distance. I pulled out my phone and sent one final email to the Ascenzi's board of directors. Subject, immediate lease termination and CEO arrest. Attachment, the video. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like ozone and exhaust, but for the first time in 5 years, it smelled clean. I touched the locket around my neck, the one with Mark's picture. Clear skies, Mark, I whispered. Airspace is secure. I walked back to the elevator, leaving Sterling screaming at the police that he knew the mayor. He didn't know the mayor, but I did. We played tennis on Thursdays. I went down to the lobby. Leo was there. Did we get him? Leo asked. We got him, I said. Clear the log, Leo, and order some pizza for the Drone Start kids on 14. Tell them the roof is open if they want to test their drones. I walked out the front doors. I didn't look back at my tower. It wasn't a tomb anymore. It was just a building. And I was just the woman who owned the sky. If you liked seeing a tech bro crash and burn, subscribe for more stories from the top floor.
And that's the story. Take care of yourselves out there. The world's unpredictable enough.